June 26, 1944. Cherbourg, France. The morning fog clings to the shattered port like a wounded animal, its breath drifting through the wrecked silhouettes of cranes and warehouses. American infantrymen from the 79th Division move cautiously through the rubble, boots crunching over twisted iron, severed mooring lines, and splintered timbers. The air tastes of cold salt, cordite, and something metallic from deep within the ruins. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Thompson, a wiry engineer officer with a notebook jammed into his breast pocket, steps onto the edge of Quai de l'Abri. At his feet, a concrete slab the size of a house has been peeled upward, as if the entire dock tried to shrug itself free. In the basin beyond, hulks of barges and tugboats rest on their sides, scuttled deliberately and packed with charges that transform the harbor into a graveyard. Behind him, a squad from the 4th Engineer Special Brigade fans out, rifles slung but ready. They stare at the destruction with a kind of reverent disbelief, as though they've stumbled into a cathedral whose roof has collapsed. Thompson kneels and runs his glove over the rough fracture in the concrete, feeling where the explosives sheared the reinforcing steel. A corporal mutters, "They didn't just wreck it, sir. They tried to erase it." The lieutenant colonel rises slowly. German forces had been ordered to turn Cherbourg into a logistical void, a place where no fleet could land and no army could be supplied. And they succeeded with precision. Every key sabotaged. Locks jammed with wrecks. Cranes toppled, warehouses torched. Piers mined. Every approach choked, even the seabed had been seeded with obstacles that reached upward like teeth. Thompson pulls the notebook from his pocket. It is already filled with sketches of cracks, depths, stress patterns, and handwritten measurements scrawled during a long night march. He flips to a fresh page and begins drawing. The sounds of nearby gunfire fade. A captain from the Naval Construction Battalions, the Seabees, strides toward him. Captain George Harlow, beard graying, helmet dented from weeks of use, carries an expression that can only be described as gritty amusement. He scans the devastation and gives a short, sharp whistle. "Well," Harlow says, "the Germans were thorough." Thompson gestures to the shattered harbor. "They wanted this place to stay dead." Harlow shakes his head. "Ports don't die. They wait to be resurrected." A distant explosion rolls across the water. Engineers are clearing leftover mines. One detonates, throwing a fountain of debris into the air. The echo bounces from the cliffs, then dissolves into the steady rhythm of waves slapping against debris. The two officers walk along the buckled edge of the quay. Each step reveals a new challenge. Sunken cranes welded to the bottom by twisted metal. A lock gate so thoroughly blown apart that the remaining half hangs like a crooked door. The Germans removed every bolt they could, burned out bearings, snapped chains, planted shaped charges in foundations. What could not be destroyed was blocked, and what could not be blocked was buried. Thompson stops at the massive wreck of a floating dry dock. It rests half submerged, listing, its interior filled with layers of mud, debris, and the hull of another vessel intentionally sunk within it. The dry dock alone could take weeks to clear. It would have taken them months to prepare this, Thompson says quietly. "Years," Harlow answers. In their heads, this place was never meant to rise again. A gust of wind carries soot from a still smoldering warehouse. The sky above the port is a mosaic of smoke columns, gulls, and drifting ash. Nearby, an engineer detachment huddles around a tangle of steel reinforcing bars that erupt from a crater like the ribs of some colossal sea creature. Thompson flips another page in his notebook. The generals want the port open fast. Supplies are already stacking behind the beaches. Harlow lets out a low breath. "They expect us to fix this in weeks?" "That's the idea." The captain laughs once, short and sharp. Not mockery, but astonishment. "The Germans said it would take a year or more. Some thought it could never be restored. That's why we're here." For a moment, the two men simply stand amid the broken harbor, its wounds illuminated by the gray morning light. The Allied armies are fighting their way through the Norman bocage, consuming mountains of fuel, ammunition, and rations. Every day the supply lines stretch farther from the beaches. And Cherbourg, once the prized northern gateway to the Atlantic, could be the artery that keeps the Allied advance alive. But right now it looks more like a puzzle built from ruins. Thompson closes the notebook. We start cataloging everything. Every crack, every wreck, every possible route for salvage. The tide tables are on their way. "I want divers in the water as soon as they can manage." Harlow nods and begins barking orders. Men scatter, each step echoing across the hollowed port. The engineers are not just facing a destroyed harbor. They are facing the deliberate vision of an enemy who believed they could halt an army by obliterating a coastline. And as the tide rolls in, swirling against the debris, the enormity of the task reveals itself. Cherbourg is a labyrinth of sabotage, a place built to resist resurrection. Yet somewhere beneath the ash and ruin, the pulse of a working port is waiting for the hands that insist on bringing it back. June 27, 1944. Cherbourg's outer harbor. The dawn tide pushes against the debris fields with a low, grinding murmur. A pale sun rises over the breakwaters, revealing the silhouettes of small craft weaving between jagged wrecks. On board one of them, a 36-foot Navy workboat, Lieutenant James Rourke stands braced against the bow rail as the vessel nudges into the heart of the ruined port. Rourke is one of the first divers sent to assess the seabed. His rubberized suit lies folded beside him like a second skin, and a hard brass Mark V helmet glints dully at his feet. The sea smells of oil and ancient mud, stirred up by the destruction. Ahead, a scuttled freighter lies across the channel like a fallen wall, its masts angled like broken fingers. Two Seabees haul up a bundle of guide ropes. The coxswain throttles down the engine, letting the boat drift toward the wreck. The metallic groan of shifting hull plates echoes faintly under the water. Rourke squints through the salty breeze. They didn't just block the channel, they choked every approach. The chief beside him nods. Makes you wonder if the Germans knew exactly where we'd come in. Rourke checks his pressure gauge, his gloves, the valve on his air line. The routine steadies him. When the coxswain kills the engine entirely, the harbor falls into a heavy quiet, waves lapping, gulls circling, distant machinery clanking from the shore where engineers have begun clearing rubble. "All right, Lieutenant," the chief says. "Time to meet the neighbors." They lower the helmet onto Rourke's shoulders, sealing him into a world where sound becomes a thud and the surface fades. After a final tug on his lifeline, he steps to the edge and drops. The water closes over him like a shutter. Light dissolves. The first few feet are murky. Below that lies darkness rich with drifting ash, wood splinters, and strands of kelp shaken loose by explosions. His boots touch bottom sooner than expected. The harbor floor has risen several feet from silt and wreckage. Rourke sweeps his lamp across the gloom. A wall of iron towers before him, the freighter's hull. Charges had blown the plates inward, creating cavernous pockets. A mine-shattered casing lies embedded in the mud, inert but unsettling. Surface, this is Rourke. The hull is resting firm. Debris everywhere. "I'll take starboard first." Static crackles in his earphones, then the chief's voice. "Copy. Watch for wires." Rourke moves slowly along the steel flank, gloved hand trailing the cold metal. Tendrils of torn cable drift in the current like seaweed. A section of railing has wedged itself into the seabed, forming a jagged arch. Beyond it, more hulks loom, small tugs, patrol boats, and even a floating pontoon deliberately sunk in layers. Up top, the engineers on shore begin the next phase. Bulldozers growl to life. Men shout over the clatter of chains as they drag burned beams from the waterline. A crane, one of the few left standing, creaks under the strain of lifting twisted scrap. Captain Harlow watches it all from a high point of the quay, cigarette between his fingers, notebook in hand, just like Thompson. The scale is clear now. Dozens of wrecks, each needing its own strategy. Some will require dynamite. Some will require patching and refloating. Others must be dismembered piece by piece until the channel's clear. Back underwater, Rourke squeezes through the railing gap. His lamp sweeps over the blurred shape of a truck half buried in sediment. The Germans had filled transport vessels with anything they could shove aboard. Crates, engines, scrap metal, concrete blocks. Anything to make lifting them impossible. Surface. Rourke says, voice calm despite the tightness in his chest. "They packed this one deep. Looks like they wanted it to stay part of the seabed." Above, the chief exhales into the mic. "Keep going. Thompson wants full mapping by dusk." Hours pass. Divers move like shadows beneath the wrecks, mapping, marking, sketching on waterproof slates. On land, Seabees swarm over the quays, clearing mines with delicate precision. A dull thud rolls across the harbor every so often as explosives teams neutralize charges left behind in abandoned storage tanks. Thompson hops between work groups, his boots coated in gray dust. He checks measurements, traces stress fractures with his finger, and fires off questions to anyone within reach. Harlow trails behind him, assigning teams, redirecting crews, and making sure equipment flows where it's needed most. At midday, the first attempt at clearing a channel begins. A salvage barge, patched together from whatever could be commandeered, lurches toward the wrecked freighter. Its improvised crane struggles, cables groaning under the weight of the first steel plates they try to haul clear. The engine belches black smoke. The current pulls at the barge, threatening to twist it sideways. Harlow winces. That boom is 2 inches from snapping. Thompson folds his arms. If we don't try, we won't learn what breaks. The crane operator revs the motors. The cables jerk. The plate lifts a few inches, enough to reveal a pocket of trapped seawater that erupts upward like a geyser. Men nearby shield their faces. The operator eases the load, letting the plate sink back onto the wreck. Too heavy, Harlow mutters. We'll need pontoons or sectional lifts. Both men stare at the freighter blocking the channel. Beyond it, the rest of Cherbourg waits more wrecks, more sabotage, more layers. But the effort has begun. And as the tide rises again, pushing against the rusted Leviathan in the harbor's throat, the engineers begin revising their plans. What seemed impossible hours earlier is starting to reveal cracks where opportunity can seep through. The first assault on the ruins is clumsy, exhausting, and dangerously improvised. Yet it marks the moment when the harbor ceases being a monument to destruction and becomes a battlefield the engineers intend to win. June 29, 1944. Cherbourg's central basin. A slate-gray sky hangs low over the harbor, thick with a dampness that clings to uniforms and seeps into boots. The morning whistle of a supply train echoes faintly from inland, reminding every engineer on the waterfront that the armies pushing through the bocage are burning through mountains of fuel and ammunition. Cherbourg doesn't just need to be repaired. It needs to awaken fast. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson steps onto what remains of the Gare Maritime Pier. Its skeletal frame juts from the water like the ribs of a shipwreck. Beneath his boots, puddles shimmer with rainbows of spilled lubricant from ruptured machinery. He scans the harbor, now alive with motion despite the destruction. Barges drift like tired beasts between work zones. Spotters shout coordinates. Pneumatic drills hammer at damaged foundations. The port feels less like a ruin and more like a factory struggling to roar back to life. Captain Harlow approaches, coat unbuttoned, radio handset clipped to his belt. Thompson. Reports from the North Quay. One of the divers found a submerged chain of demo charges still live. How close to the pier's main spine? Close enough that if one goes, we'll be fishing half the dock out of the water. Thompson exhales through his teeth. Get a disposal team in and cut the entire line. No risks. A gust of wind sends a sheet of dust swirling across the basin. The smell of burned timber mixes with brine. Farther out, a CB team works along the shattered breakwater, carving a path so salvage tugs can maneuver. One tug's engine coughs, then roars, pushing against the tide with stubborn determination. Harlow gestures toward the cluster of officers waiting near a makeshift command tent. The timetable's tightening. Higher-ups want a clear estimate by tomorrow. Thompson nods. We'll show them progress today. He strides toward the nearest group of engineers preparing a sectional lift massive floating pontoons lashed together with steel cables. Their goal, raise the first scuttled tug that blocks the approach to the main lock. The men stand ankle-deep in water, adjusting valves, tapping pressure gauges, shouting over the hiss of compressors. Sergeant Lionel Kerr, a man with the broad build of a dockworker and the calm expression of someone who's seen a lot worse than this harbor, salutes as Thompson approaches. "Morning, sir. We're ready to start inflation." End quote. Thompson crouches beside the rig, inspecting the cable tension. "You've double-checked the anchor lines?" "Yes, sir." "And the pontoons won't yaw when the load shifts?" "They'll dance," Kerr admits, "but they won't spin." Thompson gives a quick nod. "Begin." Valves twist open. Air rushes into the pontoons, swelling them like giant steel lungs beneath the water. The cables snap taut, vibrating under the strain. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the sunken tug begins to tilt. Mud boils around its hull. A groan rises from beneath the surface, metallic and mournful, as if the vessel resents being disturbed from its deep slumber. A crowd gathers Seabees, Army engineers, even infantrymen on break from clearing patrols. They watch the tug rise inch by stubborn inch. Kerr wipes sweat from his brow. "Come on, sweetheart, breathe." The pontoons shudder. The cables creak like floorboards in a cold house. Then, with a sudden surge, the tug breaks the surface fully, shedding water and curtains. Men cheer. Someone slaps the side of the pontoon, and the hollow ring echoes across the basin. Harlow jogs over, grinning. That's one channel obstruction off the list. Thompson doesn't smile, but the corners of his mouth shift. Good. Move the barge into position and tow her out. We'll mark the next wreck before evening. For the next several hours, the harbor pulses with a frantic rhythm. Divers map fresh hazards. Salvage crews cut through steel hulls. Bulldozers shove tons of wreckage downslope into designated scrap zones. Every new opening in the water feels like prying loose a lock joint in a long frozen machine. But mid-afternoon brings a setback. A mining team working near the inner lock discovers a maze of tripwires buried under the rubble. As they begin clearance, one of the wires snaps. A thunderous explosion follows, sending a bloom of dust and debris into the sky. Shockwaves roll across the quay. Men duck instinctively. A section of concrete collapses into the basin with a deafening splash. Thompson sprints toward the blast site. Medics are already there, hauling 2 injured engineers clear. The air smells of sharp smoke and scorched earth. A jagged crater yawns where the workshop foundations once stood. Harlow storms up behind him, voice edged with anger. Booby, trapped under the rubble, they buried charges like seeds. Thompson kneels beside the crater, brushing aside fragments of rebar. We can't keep losing time to surprises. We need a standardized clearance grid across every working surface. Harlow signals to a nearby lieutenant. Pull platoons from rubble duty. Set them on systematic mine sweeps. Inch by inch. Rain begins to fall soft at first, then steady enough to turn dust into paste. The harbor's machinery hisses as droplets hit hot metal. Men wipe their faces, adjust their helmets, and keep working. Near dusk, the clouds break. A shard of sunlight pierces the gray, spreading golden reflections across the water. Thompson stands on the edge of the quay, hands on his hips, watching as the first cleared lane into the central basin shines like a fresh scar. It isn't much. A narrow ribbon of navigable water. But it's proof that the harbor can be undone, wound by wound. A messenger jogs over, breathless. Sir. Announcement from headquarters. They want Cherbourg taking cargo in 3 weeks. Thompson doesn't blink. Then we work as if the war depends on it. Because in many ways, it does. June 30th, 1944. The interlock gates of Cherbourg. Mist rolls in from the channel and settles along the quays like a thin, uneasy veil. The tide is receding, exposing more of the mangled lock gates that guard the entrance to Cherbourg's inner harbor. These gates once regulated the flow of water that stabilized the port's basins. Now they sit twisted and half submerged, their metal innards blown outward in jagged spirals. The Germans didn't just sabotage them. They annihilated their function. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson steps into the lock chamber, boots splashing in the ankle-deep mix of seawater and debris. The air carries the smell of rust and damp masonry, the scent of a place wounded all the way down to its bones. Beside him, Master Diver Edward Red Callahan unspools a length of rope, checking knots with a rhythmic confidence born from years in salvage work. Red squints at the ruined gate leaf leaning drunkenly against the far wall. Looks like someone tried to fold a battleship hull in half. Thompson crouches and runs a hand along the shattered brickwork. Charges placed inside the hinges. Shape charges along the footings. They meant to cripple this permanently. Permanence a suggestion, Red says. We overpower it, or we go around it. Harlow arrives behind them with a rolled blueprint tucked beneath his arm. He snaps it open across a dry patch of masonry. Hydraulic systems are shot. Mechanical arms are gone. No chance of repair. We need a bypass. Thompson scans the drawing. We cut a temporary gap here. He taps a rectangular outline along the western wall. Just wide enough for supply craft. Red raises an eyebrow. Cutting through a 10-foot thick lock wall is the long way around. It's the only way around, Thompson says. The decision lands like a stone dropped into deep water. The men accept it without question. Soldiers can take a hill. Engineers can carve through a coastline. Within hours, equipment arrives. Pneumatic drills. Explosive charges rated for controlled demolition. Steel bracing beams. A floodlight generator thumps to life, casting stark white light across the ruined lock. Work begins. Drills punch into the wall, their shrill chattering filling the evening air. Masonry dust billows upward in pale clouds. Sledgehammers swing. Sparks spit from metal teeth grinding against embedded rebar. Teams rotate in shifts, each group lasting only minutes before fatigue sets in. The lock wall, cold, ancient, unyielding, refuses to give easily. Thompson oversees every inch. He moves between crews like a conductor guiding an orchestra of noise and sweat. At one point he kneels beside a drilling team, studying the alignment. Shift the line 8 inches to the left. We keep the stress load even. The sergeant nods. On it, sir. Night deepens. A crescent moon hangs over Cherbourg, faint behind drifting clouds. Most of the city sleeps, its streets still scarred from the battle days earlier. But at the port, the lights burn steady. The drills keep biting. The engineers keep pushing. Shortly after midnight, the wall groans. A deep, low sound reverberates through the chamber, like distant thunder. The nearest crew freezes. Dust trickles down from the crack they've been widening. Red moves in fast, slapping his palm against the surface. He listens. We're close. There's a cavity forming. Thompson steps back. Prep the first explosive set. Charges are placed with delicate precision, small enough to fracture the masonry without collapsing surrounding sections. Wires snake back across the chamber to a sandbagged alcove. Harlow gives the all clear. The night holds its breath. A muffled blast punches through the lock. The wall shudders. Chunks of stone tumble inward, splashing into the dark water. Steam rises from the blast point, drifting across the chamber like a ghost drifting home. When the dust settles, a rough opening yawns in the wall, small, jagged, but promising. The men cheer. Thompson allows himself a moment to exhale. But the victory is short-lived. A runner arrives, panting, mud spattered on his fatigues. Sirs, North Basin. The scuttled freighter shifted in the tide. She's blocking the work lanes again. Harlow mutters under his breath. That wreck has 9 lives. Thompson straightens. We rotate crews. Keep the blast team here. Harlow, take me to the basin. As they climb out of the lock chamber, the runner leading the way, the harbor looms before them, a battlefield of metal, water, and shadows. The moon glints off half-sunken cranes. The silhouette of the freighter rises and falls with the tide like some slumbering iron beast. Engineers swarm the decks and edges with lanterns and ropes. Thompson pauses on the quay, taking in the scene. The war in France rages miles inland, but here at this wounded gateway another kind of battle wages. Quiet, grinding, relentless. A battle fought not with rifles, but with grit, tools, and ideas. And every inch gained brings them closer to reopening the artery that will feed an army. July 2nd, 1944. North Basin, Cherbourg. The morning tide drags a cold wind across the water, stirring whitecaps against the ragged hull of the freighter that refuses to stay put. Engineers cluster along the quay, their silhouettes outlined by the floodlights still burning from the night shift. The ship, once a German supply vessel, is now a contorted barricade, its stern wedged deep into the mud while its bow drifts just enough for the tide to tug it sideways and ruin every planned salvage approach. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson arrives with Captain Harlow at his side. They step onto a temporary catwalk of steel planks laid across the debris. Beneath them, seawater slaps against twisted bulkheads, echoing through the basin like the heartbeat of some restless monster. Chief Salvage Officer Alton Briggs, a stocky man with an oil-stained cap, salutes. She moved again in the night, sir. Currents pushed her straight into the center of the work channel. Thompson studies the freighter's shadowy outline. We anchor her bow. Then we lift the stern. No more drifting. Briggs nods, though his eyes flick toward the wreck like he's staring down a dangerous animal. Divers say the hull plating's torn to ribbons. Hard to find strong points for anchors. Harlow taps his pencil against his clipboard. We build our own. Within minutes, crews rush to assemble a set of fabricated anchor frames, steel triangles bolted to reinforced plates designed to sink and bite into the harbor floor. A crane swings them out over the basin. With a metallic splash, each frame disappears into the murky depths. Red Callahan and 2 divers slip beneath the surface seconds later, their helmets reflecting the pale dawn light. The water swallows them whole, leaving only the ripples where their lifelines trail. Thompson kneels by the edge, listening to the hiss of the air pumps, watching bubbles rise near the freighter's prow. Harlow pulls out his stopwatch. They both know the divers are working in near-complete darkness, navigating by touch alone. Minute pass. Tension tightens like a cable. Finally, Red's voice crackles over the handset. Anchors are seated. Hulls torn bad, but we found solid ribs to lash to. Start tension on the bow line. Briggs signals. Winches whine. Thick cables snake from the barge to the sunken anchors. Slowly, the freighter's bow stiffens, its lazy drift halted. But the stern is another matter. To lift it, the engineers have rigged the largest set of pontoons yet assembled. They bob in the basin like enormous steel loaves, valves hissing, cables draped across them in thick bundles. Floodlights bounce off their slick surfaces as crews check couplings and gauges. Sergeant Kerr steps up beside Thompson. If she tips while rising, the whole thing could roll. Thompson scans the alignment. She won't tip, run the tension evenly, and pull slow. Kerr grins, the expression of a man about to arm wrestle a mountain. Slow it is. The pontoons begin inflating. Air thunders into their hollow chambers. Their shadows swell on the water as the cables strain and tighten. Underwater, mud churns. The freighter's stern shifts, just a fraction, but enough for the watching crews to lean forward with held breath. Again the pontoons swell, dragging the stern up another inch. A groan rises from the hull. It vibrates through the basin floor and sends ripples across the water. One of the pontoons shudders violently. Harlow grips his clipboard. Ease the port side. She's twisting. Briggs shouts the command. Valves are adjusted. The pontoons settle, breathing like some shared mechanical lung. Another inch. Then another. At last, with a heave that sends waves slapping against the quay, the freighter's stern breaks the surface, shedding brackish water in long curtains. The exposed propellers glint with rust. Seaweed streams from the gashes along her plating. Shouts echo across the basin. Men slap each other's shoulders. One of the winch operators pumps a fist in the air. Thompson allows himself a single breath of relief. Hold her steady, tow line ready. Briggs nod. Sir. Just as the salvage tug begins inching forward, the freighter gives a sudden tilt. Kerr yells, she's slipping. The stern drops half a foot, jolting the cables. One pontoon plunges at a sharp angle, taking on water. A cable snaps with a shriek, whipping across the air. Men dive for cover, cut pressure on the starboard pontoon. Briggs roars. Thompson sprints down the catwalk, boots hammering against the steel planks. He grabs a corporal by the shoulder. Shut the intake. Now. The corporal lunges for the valve wheel. It resists at first, then gives, spinning with a metallic whine. The pontoons stabilize. The freighter settles again, but this time it doesn't twist. Red's voice crackles through the headset. She's still floatable. Adjust the lift another 6 degrees to port, that'll counter the tear we found. Briggs wipes his brow. You heard the man. Reset tension. The winches respond. The pontoons breathe again. Slowly, carefully, the iron giant rises to its full salvage height. This time it stays up. Thompson looks across the basin, watching as the first major wreck of the North Channel is towed aside, clearing a path where none existed that morning. Beyond the cranes and rubble, the inner harbor glimmers with possibility. Work continues deep into the night. Salvage crews rotate, divers surface trembling from cold, cables are swapped, beams tightened. Every foot gained feels like carving a new artery in a body that refuses to die. But the path is forming. And as the wreck drifts toward the scrap zone at dawn's first light, Thompson realizes that the Germans had been wrong. Cherbourg can rise. All it needs is the relentless will of those determined to free it from the sea. July 4, 1944. Cherbourg's inner harbor approaches. The sunrise casts a copper glow across the freshly cleared North Channel. For the first time since the Germans tried to bury Cherbourg under its own bones, the water lies open in a ribbon of navigable space. It isn't pretty. Rusted fragments still cling to the edges, and the currents swirl with lingering debris, but it is open. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson stands on the deck of a commandeered tug, coat flapping in the cold morning breeze. Behind him, Captain Harlow checks bearings on a marked chart tacked to a makeshift plotting table. Around them, a handful of Seabees warm their hands on tin cups of weak coffee, their faces carrying the exhausted pride of men who pushed monsters off the seafloor. The tug captain calls out, entering the sweep zone. Thompson steps forward, steadying himself against the rail. The tug moves slowly, deliberately, its engine thumping like a slow drumbeat. They trace the channel's edge, verifying depths, checking alignment. marking hazards that will need attention before cargo ships can approach without fear of tearing themselves open on submerged steel. Depth holding at 14 feet, Harlow says, squinting at the gauge. Tight, but within acceptable margin. Supply lighters can manage that, Thompson replies. Liberty ships will still need the main basin. And to reach that, we cut the lock wall wider. Thompson nods. Tonight. Ahead, the water becomes a mirror of fractured sunlight. But beneath it lies the next problem, the tangle of scuttled fishing trawlers the Germans dumped to seal the approach to the inner lock. Their masts jut out at odd angles like the bones of drowned trees. Red Callahan waits on a salvage barge beside the cluster of wrecks, helmet off, hair dripping from an early dive. He shouts as the tug slides closer. 30 hulls, sir. Some on top of each other. Like they were stacking cordwood. Thompson steps aboard the barge, landing with a metallic thud. What can we float? Maybe 5 or 6. The rest are too torn up or packed with ballast. Best we break those down where they sit. Harlow joins them, flipping through his notebook. We've got enough cutting torches to start on the upper timbers. Divers can prep the segments underwater. Thompson looks across the wreck forest. The tide has dropped enough to reveal the upper curves of the hulls, barnacle-encrusted and splintered. Each one is a problem set. Multiplied 30 times, they threaten to choke progress again. He turns to Callahan. We'll clear 2 full lanes, one for tows, one for scows hauling debris. Red cracks a grin. A salvage highway. Exactly. Work begins with the rising heat of the day. Sparks fly from torches as engineers slice through masts and railings. Wooden hulls crack and groan under the strain of being forced apart after weeks underwater. Divers attach lift bags to the semi-intact trawlers. Teams on the surface guide the rising carcasses with ropes, shouting over the roar of compressors. One trawler breaks the surface in a violent surge, its hull exploding upward in a cloud of sprays as if the sea itself is spitting it out. Men cheer. Thompson shields his face as droplets pepper the barge. But the next lift doesn't go as cleanly. A trawler begins to rise. Then stops. The lift bags strain, bulging, their seams whining, mud churns around the wreck. Red curses through the mic. She's caught on something. Probably a steel frame. Cut it loose, Thompson says. Trying standby. Moments later, the trawler jerks violently sideways. A lifeline snaps, whipping across the surface. One man dives flat to avoid it. Another staggers but keeps his footing. The wreck finally tears free with a shudder that rattles the barge. Loose timbers and debris swirl in the current. Harlow exhales. Every one of these is booby-trapped by nature. Or German planning, Thompson answers. Hours pass. The sun arcs overhead. The tide shifts again. One by one, the obstacles are cleared, dragged, lifted, or chopped into manageable pieces. By late afternoon, the water begins to move freely through the newly opened artery toward the lock wall bypass that waits to be widened. As the crews break for a moment's rest, a runner arrives on a bicycle, mud streaking his trousers. Message from command, sir, he says between breaths. General wants first cargo unloaded in 16 days. Fuel, ammunition, medical supplies, says the advance depends on it. Harlow lets out a low whistle. They keep shrinking the clock. Thompson looks at the cleared channel. The lock bypass. The salvage lanes. The rising piles of scrap at the quaysides. The engineers working in rotations, sleeping in shifts, eating standing up. Every inch gained is bought with sweat and danger. He tucks the message into his pocket. We'll meet the deadline, he says. The words aren't a boast. They're an oath. As evening gathers over the harbor, the tide flows through the newly opened lanes for the first time since the battle. Water, unimpeded, glides toward the inner grounds. It sounds like breathing. The arteries are opening. And soon, the heart of Cherbourg will beat again. July 6, 1944. Cherbourg's inner lock wall. The morning fog clings to the stone like a second skin, softening the jagged wounds the Germans carved when they tried to seal the port forever. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson walks along the battered lock wall with Captain Harlow, boots scraping across chipped concrete. Behind them, engineers haul crates of dynamite and coils of primer cord like a procession of determined ants. The plan for the day is brutal in its simplicity. Widen the bypass with controlled demolitions, carve a reliable passage for Liberty ship drafts, and do it all before the next tide swallows the workspace. Nothing stays dry here for long. The sea rises like an impatient judge, lifting debris, flooding trenches, erasing progress if the engineers miscalculate by even a few minutes. Master Sergeant Quinlan waits at the edge of the construction pit, tapping a grease pencil against a soggy map pinned beneath a roofing shingle. Charges are placed. Outer cuts ready first. We'll follow with the midline if the structure holds. Thompson glances over the markings. What about the foundation slab? Test drill shows fractures. Once we blow the wall, the slab might shift a little. A little? Quinlan shrugs. We'll find out. It is honest engineering in wartime, a marriage of precision and necessary gambling. The Germans built these walls to command the tides, not surrender to them. And now the Americans must force a cooperation that stone doesn't willingly offer. The demolition team threads the last wires. Harlow kneels beside a junction box, tightening a final connection with hands darkened by a week of grit and engine grease. All set, he says. We detonate at low tide peak. That gives us the longest working window. Thompson nods, scanning the gathered men. Clear the basin, secure equipment. Double-check the perimeter. Quinlan utters the familiar refrain. Nobody wants a surprise blast bath. The crew disperses. Soon the lock area becomes eerily quiet except for the distant cough of generators and the rhythmic slosh of the tide's slow withdrawal. The wall, pockmarked and defiant, towers above the engineers like an old fortress daring them to try their luck. Det cord line secure, Harlow calls. Ready on your mark. Thompson lifts the firing device, thumb resting gently on the trigger switch. In the gray light, the battered wall looks eerily calm, as if unaware of what's coming. Fire in the hole. Quinlan bellows. The engineers brace themselves. Thompson clicks the switch. A muted thump rolls out, followed by a deep, rumbling crack that trembles through the stone. Dust blossoms upward like a pale ghost. A section of the wall buckles inward, rock shearing as designed. Then a louder roar erupts as the center line gives way. Chunks of concrete plunge into the basin with cannonball splashes. A sharp blast of wind sweeps across the site as air rushes to fill the void. The men shield their faces until the dust settles. When they look again, the bypass is wider. But not wide enough. Harlow is already scrambling down the slope, waving the spotters forward. Check the fractures. Let's see what it bought us. Thompson follows, picking his path amid loose rubble. The exposed layers show vertical splits promising signs. A second demolition round could pry the remaining mass free. Quinlan inspects the damage with the careful eye of a man who has blown apart more obstacles than he's built. We're halfway there. Need smaller cuts to open the lower cavity. And we have 4 hours before the tide rises, Thompson says. Then we better hurry. Cutting teams move in at once, hammer drills screaming against the stone. Sparks flash, gravel flies, and the air thickens with pulverized concrete. The tide creeps closer, its edge moving inch by inch across the basin floor like an advancing army. 30 minutes later, Quinlan gives the signal. The second set of charges is planted. Harlow emerges from the lower cavity drenched in sweat and concrete slurry, clutching the final connector. Ready, he gasps. Thompson fires again. This time the wall shudders violently. The basin shakes as the lower section fractures, collapsing inward in a controlled cascade. Seawater rushes in, swirling around the fallen slabs, carrying them aside in a turbulent dance. The current snaps through the widening gap like a river escaping captivity. When the spray settles, the engineers stare at the result. A navigable breach. Rough, imperfect, but open. The bypass can take the draft of incoming supply ships. Red Callahan jogs up from the salvage yard, breathing hard. Tides are rising fast. We'll need to reinforce the shoulders by tonight. Thompson wipes his face with a dusty sleeve. We'll have the crews rotate. No stoppage. Not for weather, not for tide. We finish this. He turns toward the widening waterway. In the dim light, it resembles a wound healing in reverse. Not closing, but opening. A gateway returning to life. Cherbourg's heart beat faster. July 25th, 1944. Cherbourg. The harbor no longer feels like a ruin. It feels like a creature waking up fully, stretching iron limbs, and breathing through its rebuilt channels. Dawn light spills across the water in restless flashes, catching the silhouettes of 3 Liberty ships anchored in the outer roads, waiting their turn. The first waves of cargo have already surged inland, feeding divisions pushing hard through the bocage. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson stands on the roof of the old customs building, now patched with tarpaulin and sandbags. Below him, the piers rumble with activity. Forklifts weave between towers of crates, tugs shuttle between berthing points. Welding arcs glitter along the skeletons of cranes rising back to full height. The place moves with the rhythm of purpose. Captain Harlow climbs the ladder behind him, carrying a clipboard crowded with notes, figures, and penciled revisions. Daily throughput is up another 12%, he says. We'll break the pre-war French record by next week. Thompson doesn't reply right away. He watches Red Callahan on a salvage scow below, barking instructions as his crew drags up the last fragments of a scuttled barge. Every haul of twisted iron reminds the harbor of the forces that tried to suffocate it. Germany thought they buried this place, Thompson says. Concrete, wrecks, mines, sunken ships. Layer on layer. Harlow gives a dry grunt. And now they can't stop it. Supplies pouring in. Divisions rolling east. Cherbourg's a fountain again. A dispatch rider arrives at the base of the ladder and shouts up. Message from Corps. Harlow descends a few rungs to take it. He hands it to Thompson. The paper is creased and smudged, but the content is crisp enough. Advance accelerating faster than anticipated. Supply intake at Cherbourg is exceeding projections. Command expresses commendation to all engineering units. Thompson folds the message. We'll pass it on to the men. He turns his gaze toward the fortified heights beyond the harbor. The German emplacements still stand like stone ghosts, though the guns have long since fallen silent. Their designers poured concrete as if they believed it could anchor the future. But futures are built by those who show up with tools, sweat, stubbornness, and a clock no one believes they can beat. Down at the main quay, a fresh roar rises as another Liberty ship noses into position. Her hull is sunburnt, but her decks are stacked high. A beacon of steel, labor, and urgency. Her captain leans out of the bridge window, waving to the tug crews guiding her in. The ship swings gracefully into the berth, settling against the fenders with a heavy sigh. Crews swarm forward, leaping to secure the lines. Cranes whir to life with an almost celebratory frenzy. Harlow rests his arms on the rail. When you think about it, 10 days ago, this was still a crater full of drowned concrete. And now? Thompson asks. A gateway, Harlow says. Wide open. They stand in silence for a moment, letting the harbor speak for itself. Engines cough alive, chains rattle, boots clatter across planks, officers shout orders, and the heartbeat of Cherbourg thunders in a rhythm that promises pressure, progress, and the relentless march of an Allied army determined to punch through France and into the heart of Europe. Red Callahan climbs the ramp toward them, wiping grease on his trousers. He gestures toward the bustling quays. I think she's back, sir. Whole thing. She's alive. Thompson nods. And she'll be feeding the front until this war is finished. A gull circles overhead, crying out over the noise. The water below churns with motion. The cranes rise higher each day, steel bones knitting back together under calloused hands. Cherbourg was supposed to stay dead. German commanders said it would take months if not years to make the port useful. And yet here it stands. A rebuilt artery pumping lifeblood toward the Allied spearheads carving through Normandy. Thompson takes a final look across the harbor, the ships arriving, the cranes swinging, the engineers pushing past exhaustion, and the promise of the road ahead. The impossible has already been done. And the war is far from finished.